one of the things that really struck me was just how long all of this took. Knowing nothing about kidnappings beforehand, I would think, I don't know, you resolve this in a week? I don't know, something like that. And you'll have these communications, and there'll be a disagreement over the price or logistics or something, and they'll say, okay, we'll talk again in a week, or we'll talk again in a month. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, I don't know if that's a strategy on their part or a necessity, but like just the emotional anguish to be put through, every time that happens.
Well, yeah, it was truly awful. And I mean, obviously, to hear another week or, as pointed out, a month was awful. But I think of any place in the states, this would never have happened. And the reason why is because, it, I mean, also your chances of surviving a kidnapping in the states are very low, or at least back in the day. I mean, the statistics I remember from back then, um, because law enforcement, the risk is so high to the kidnappers. Them getting killed or law enforcement apprehending them. People are a lot more nervous. You're in, maybe it's a house somewhere in a neighborhood, and you have to be really discreet. In Colombia, it was a completely different story. FARC, controlled all these territories in the country, and the territory that my dad was held in was, it was bigger than Singapore. I think it was like huge amounts of land that were basically ungoverned, by the Colombian government, but FARC ruled, and it had become such a business, that it would be bad business for FARC. This is one of the things we learned very early on, is like, we're actually, I mean, yes, your chances of getting kidnapped were higher in Colombia, but it was probably at the time one of the better places to be kidnapped, because it was a business, and people in getting killed is bad for business. What the FARC wanted people to know, families to know, was that if you deal with us, if you negotiate with us, you're going to get them back, most likely. And but they also, they've got what you want. They've got your husband or your father or whatever, and so they want to make as much money as possible. So they want to milk you dry, and it becomes this whole, like, it's just this mind game. And that's what we had learned. Like, once this negotiation process started, we had to we didn't the ransom demand was for $6 million. We didn't have anything close to $6 million. If we had $6 million, the stupidest thing in the world we could do is say, all right, here you go, here's the $6 million. Because for them, it's not like in the States, where the chances of them getting caught are, very high. The chances of any repercussions were so low that, for them, it would just be like, no, that was just too easy. We took the great, that's our down payment. And it actually ended up happening to us, in my dad's case, not with $6 million, a much smaller amount. But the point being that, you ultimately, it's this game of trying to convince the other side, the bad guys, that they've taken you for everything you're worth. I mean, whether that's true or it's not. If they're not, they'll keep them as long as they feel like they can still keep on, getting money, because they don't fear repercussions. Once we learned that time, it was, that's where they had all the power, was with time. And so we just had to be patient. I mean, but it was not easy. It was
Yeah.
definitely easy.
Did your thoughts ever wander to, what your dad was going through during all of this?
Of course, yes. I mean, I thought about my dad, but I tried not to too often. I mean, it wasn't something that, uh, I wanted to force on myself, and I know it was the same for my mom and for my brother, because, while, because it was hard. I mean, that was you couldn't think of anything good, if, when you thought about his scenario, what he was facing, whether he was in alive or not. it didn't do anybody any good to do that. All we could do was sort of focus on these avenues that were handed to us, these negotiations, these radio contacts, and just keep playing this sort of game that people have been telling us about. I did think about him. It wasn't healthy too. So we tried, all of us, my entire family tried to, kind of keep it at a minimum because it just wasn't gonna do anybody any good to just be just completely distraught the entire time. But those first few days, we certainly were, and the panic, the nervousness, all that were just unbearable. But as with all things, pandemics or whatever, I mean, we were all extremely fearful at first, but then we learned how to navigate, and we sort of become used to it. And I'm not, I don't mean to speak for other people to say the pandemic isn't scary anymore, but like I know from myself, it's quite different now than it was a year ago. I kind of know where I go and how to handle myself and you know what I mean? Like, but when it's all the unknowns, that's when it's scary, the
Yeah.
scariest.
One of the really interesting things in terms of, the healthy way to deal with a family member being kidnapped is how you guys tried to create both kind of like a purpose-driven familial unit and also a sense of normalcy, having those dinners, kind of dancing, playing music, that kind of stuff. I thought that was really interesting. And was that something you guys made a conscious effort to do, or did it just organically come about?
It seemed to organically just happen that way. But I think, particularly Claudia, our German neighbor, the mom or the wife there, she really, really tried to encourage us as much as possible because we had sort of a communal space between our houses, like it was this kiosk, and she really tried to encourage us to come together and like, let's plan dinners, let's have something to look forward to, because there were some long, depressing, drawn out, emotional days, and you needed something. Like if there was nothing to look forward to, on a daily basis, it just over time it would have been awful. But by kind of keeping this stiff upper lip and making sure that that music was playing and the candles were burning, and that we came up with these creative dinners and stuff. It sort of really bonded us as a group, gave us something to look forward to. But it wasn't just fun. It was, I mean, we would let loose for a minute or two, while we ate or whatever, but it inevitably always came back to this inner circle of like, what are we going to do next? It just made us gathering together a little bit nicer, to talk about these things that we just couldn't avoid.
Right, right. One of the things I think the film also does a really good job of doing is conveying, you have these kind of climactic moments, like this is it, this is going to be the drop, or we're going to get, dad's coming back tonight. And, the suspense of that and just the logistics of dealing with that, to end up finding out, nope, it's not going to happen tonight. It's not going to, and again, I don't know if that's an intentional tactic on the part of the kidnappers, but just how emotionally exhausting that must be to build yourself up for that, and it doesn't happen.
Yeah, it that happened too often. Where we had high expectations about something, and then it's like, no, in fact, the complete opposite. But I think, I get, yeah. I mean, particularly, it was a little bit easier in the beginning when things wouldn't go the way we had expected, because actually there had always been this roadmap, as I alluded to earlier, or I talked about earlier, like all these Colombians had told us, and all these other kidnappings, all these experiences. We were talking to the advisors on other kidnapping cases too that were going on in the country or in the area. Like, and we would meet, and our advisors would talk to their advisors, and we'd get kind of the lowdown on everything that was happening. And so we knew that the chances of a double, which basically means like, instead of the agreed price, ransom, you do a ransom payment, and they release him. They then say, oh, well, now we need a second payment from you. We knew that was a real possibility because that's what had been happening in a lot of kidnappings in the area. So as disappointing, or when we got shut off for a month, it's called a silence. It was a tactic that we were expecting, where they know that again, as I talked about earlier, that they have nothing but time on their hands, and they can just use that as a ploy to make you as a family more desperate. And I was saying there had been sort of this roadmap the entire time, and that's how so that's how we were able to manage it. But it wasn't until the end, when we paid 2 ransoms and it felt like we hadn't that he wasn't going to come home, that we were sort of venturing into territory that we didn't know about. Like, there weren't other examples that anybody else could give us. And so we had this real feeling of panic and failure. And I think we had felt fairly calm most of the time. But there, near the end, of course, we didn't know it was the end, was actually rock bottom, because it was all new territory. So having that roadmap kind of helped a little bit, as much as you didn't like to hear the things you would hear.
Right. And on that note, so bit of a spoiler here.
Romance threw itself off the 30th floor. Get up.